The need for feeding Kenya is clear. Behind me is the small village of Napeleny. These are the villagers, and earlier we could hear them doing calls to each other. You could hear them whistle to call to each other to come get food.
Hata sasa unasikia watu wanaitana huko, wanatafuta watu, wanaambia kujeni, kuna chakula.
And we'll be trying to communicate to Kenyans and the world that there is a community that is really marginalized.
We need to address the water problem in the region, like how to harvest water in this region.
This is not a story about hunger. This is not a story about aid. This is a story about how we made some friends in a village called Napeleny, all the way in Baringo County. You see, what happened was that the news was awash with the fact that people in Baringo were dying of hunger. So me and a friend of mine decided to come together and do something about it. We decided that the little we had could be put together and we could go there, not to help, because that's easy. It's easy to sit somewhere in Nairobi and say, you know what, I can send an M-Pesa message and it will be fine. But we decided to make friends. We decided to be good Samaritans. Good Samaritans in the sense that we decided that we will go there not only give the first aid of giving them food and water for a day, but we decided to go and find out what are the problems they are facing and how can we help their problems. So our journey started early in the morning, one Thursday, when we decided we were going to drive down and meet our new friends. Now, among us were very many different people from different walks of life. They were students, there were people who got offs to get off of work to do what they were doing. There were members of NGOs, and then there were mothers, there were fathers. We were just Kenyans coming together, Christians coming together. Our journey, as you can see, was dotted with a lot of fun and a lot of love. The amount of laughter in the bus was palpable. People were singing, people were joyous. We were excited. Why? Because we'd come together, joined by unity of purpose and for the love of fellow humanity. We discussed throughout the journey what we imagined the place would be like. We wondered how it would be like to drive into a place that doesn't have electricity, or where would we charge our phones. But the spirit in the bus was energetic. The love, how we connected to each other, as you can see, was amazing. In fact, some of us got to sing some songs. We finally got to Nakuru town, where we got to buy some maize and other cereals and you know, energy biscuits and milk, so that we could supply these people in case we met people who were not hungry, too hungry. They had maize to boil, but we also had some milk and some glucose and some emergency rations to make sure that if there was anyone who was in dire need, we'd be able to meet them. And the journey proceeded all the way to Marigat. And in Marigat, we met very many interesting people. And that, my friends, was when we said goodbye to civilization as we know it. Because now we started riding towards Lake Baringo, and the scenes were beautiful. I'm telling you, it was eye-catching. The shrubbery, when you looked at both sides of the windows of the bus, and then, of course, the beauty of Lake Baringo as you passed it. But as we passed it, we realized two things. That number one, we couldn't see any houses on the side of the road. But even more interesting is if you look at the pictures of Lake Baringo, there was not a single fishing boat on that lake. Now, Lake Baringo is a freshwater lake. It means that it has fish in it. So we wondered, one, there's a lake here that can provide water, and two, there's fish in that lake that can provide food. And we wondered why no one was fishing. And we could tell as we were riding along, we could see little children carrying bottles of muddy water. And the water was muddy because we could see that the water pans that had been dug had become full of silt, and therefore were muddy. So we rode on this dusty road for what seemed like forever. When you looked at Google, it said we'd be there in 6 hours, yet here we were 6.5 hours later, still on a dirt road. No traffic at all, crossing no cars. We were the only two vehicles, a lorry full of maize and a bus full of volunteers. And we journeyed on, kilometer after kilometer, till we finally got to Tangle Bay at about 6 in the evening. When we got to Tangle Bay about 6 in the evening, the main concern for a lot of people was, A, where are we going to sleep? And B, are there any wildlife? Now, to B, the answer was interesting. Nakedi, who was served as our translator and runs an excellent NGO, told us that before a human being dies of hunger, do you think there's any animal left? And true to his word, I think we saw a totality of 2 ostriches in the entire journey. So clearly the wildlife had been wiped out to keep humanity alive. Now, to the first question, that's interesting. My friend, there is no 5-star accommodation. In fact, there's 0-star accommodation. We had to find a way of getting accommodation, and the only way we had is, thank God, we had the foresight to carry some tents. So the local Catholic church was very nice to us, accommodated us. We slept in these little tents, and the comfort level cannot be measured because there was no comfort. But thankfully, we had a goat that was given to us by one of the villagers that we were able to eat, and we were nicely treated by the people. They were nice to us. They came in the morning and they offered us breakfast of chapati and mayai. Mayai is eggs, and it was an amazing breakfast. So in the morning, our hosts began to tell us how the place is like. So there was this young man who had brought us the chapati and eggs that I talked about before. And then there was the area chief, the area DCC and ACC, and they were telling us what are the challenges of that area. Apparently, many of the young men, because of the lack of an employment and even worse, the lack of hope, had sunk into drinking copious amounts of changa. In fact, the previous night we could hear them sing at the top of their voices, beautiful, beautiful songs, by the way, traditional songs, but egged on by alcohol. So there was a serious changa problem. But what touched us most was this young man who came to serve us breakfast. And this young man, I looked at him and I asked him, "Why are you not in school?" And his answer broke my heart. He said, "I'm not in school because my parents cannot afford the uniform. They can't afford it. 600 shillings, whatever it is, they couldn't afford it." So that moment, what we decided to do is we got shoes out and we got whatever it is we could get, and we gave him unga. And we gave him as much as we could so that he could take it to his mother. His only concern was how much he could carry to his mother. And even after we'd given him bales of unga, and we'd given him water, and we'd given him milk, and we'd given him meat, he said, "Do you have plastic bottles?" And he started collecting these empty water bottles, one after the other, went through the bus, went person to person, collecting these bottles of water, just so he could go sell them so that his family could eat. At the age of 8, young Kipto is a breadwinner. He has no concern for school anymore, because how can he go to school when his siblings, because he's the firstborn, can't survive? That was our first taste of the pain that lay ahead. We got into the bus heavy-hearted, everyone considering what we had seen. We decided that when we go back, we'd go back with uniform for young Kipto, but our hearts had been touched and our minds had been changed. On our way, we had to stop at the town center, and as we stood by the town center, was seated this woman, and she was wiping tears from her eyes. We approached her and we asked her what was wrong. And her story was another heartbreaking story. Her neighbors had burnt her house, accusing her of being a witch. The only evidence they had of this was the fact that her cat had bitten a neighbor, and incidentally later the neighbor happened to die. And there she was in the middle of the town, nowhere to sleep. She had spent days outside the chief's house waiting for the village elders to settle things in her village. She had no food. She had no place to go. So once again, the team sprang into action, and some of us counseled, and they sat with her for a few minutes to find out what was going on. We went and found a place where she could stay, and we paid the rent for that small house, and we gave her some food. And for the first time in days, she had food and shelter and clothing. First time. And what began ringing in our minds is, here we were in what was a town. Tangul Bay is a town to them. And there was no economic activity of substance to speak of. People still believed in witchcraft. They were mistreating each other based on outdated beliefs. Women, we learned, were not valued. And because she had no husband, she'd been kicked out. And we were told an even sadder story of a lady who had struggled to bring up her child all by herself, and he'd gotten all the way to Form 4, which is an amazing feat in this area. And now she was fighting for her son to get appointed at a job. And the only reason they had refused for him to get a job was simply because he was the son of a single mother. These were the tastes, before we even got to the village of where we were going. These were the tastes of the pain and anguish and daily trauma that these people go through. Again, when we got into the bus to finally make the trip down to the village, our hearts were heavy. Heavy indeed. A few kilometers past the town, network died. And on this road, the only thing you'd see once in a while is a motorbike. And as we drove to this village, we got to the small town of Toto, which is the only center they have. And it is a center because it has one posho mill and one shop. That's it. And a few huts here and there. That's the commerce there. And when we got there, word began to get round that we'd come with aid. And even in this town, people began to run out of their houses with sacks and bags, asking us to give them some of the produce we had. So we told them, no, please follow us to the village. As we left Toto towards Napeleny, we thought that when we got to Napeleny village, we would finally meet a collection of houses like many of us are used to. But what happened is the lorry got to the end of the road, literally the end of the road, and put the bags of maize down. And we asked our guides, where is the village? And they told us this is the village, and it just looked like an open field. And as we were offloading the maize, we could hear people calling through the hills, because it's a very hilly area, and you could hear whistles that sounded almost like shouts, sounds I've never heard before. And the chief told us that that's how they called to each other to gather at a particular point. And it didn't take long. Suddenly we had 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people gathered there and growing. And since we'd not just come to distribute food and go, we had come to make friends with these people. So we decided to have a chat. And how you have chats there is you go down to this dried riverbed, and then the men sit separate from the women, and then you sit there and you have conversation. And we began to have these conversations. And what they had to say is interesting. I will let you hear it from them.
When we were informed that you are coming, we said we are coming here to host you because when visitors are coming, it is our responsibility to host them.
America lo turo nya wo ngama nya me wanso nye yine me wanso nya mo la kala bala bala takare ku wanso mi nya ngene dumne ya tamba saidi ya miezi 3.
Na tuko hapa siku ya leo peke yake, tutakuja zaidi na zaidi kwa sababu sataki kuleta mahindi peke yake. Tunataka sisi muwe marafiki wetu. Tufanye kazi kwenye tumasimama hapa kukuwe na maji mwaka ujao.
And we are seeing that God is opening a way for us as Pokot. Media and people say Pokot are bad, but Pokot people are not bad. You can see for yourselves. We love all Kenyans. We are not against anybody. If a thief is a thief, it is a thief. The way they steal in Nairobi or the way they steal here, they are all thieves. Thank you. Thank you.
We had been accepted, not as people coming to give aid, but as part of the family. But what I want to emphasize here is what that lady said in that clip. She said that they're not all thieves, they're not all cattle rustlers. Just like we in our cities have some people who are thieves, it does not make all of us thieves. And perhaps that's a sign that we need to change what we think of these people. Because true to the fact, to this point, we had not met once with hostility. We had not once met with people who were warrior-like. We met with loving people who had amazing jewelry and have amazing beadwork, and they're just nice people. At this point, we started distributing the food. And we were happy to do so. We had met our brothers and sisters, and we'd made a simple pledge that we want them to go to school the same way we got a chance to go to school. We want them to drink water the same way we can take a glass of water for granted, and we want them to be able to eat the same way that we eat. But just as we were distributing the food, word began to come to us, one person after the other. And they began to tell us how that their plan for the maize we were providing for them was for them to go make some ugali and eat it with salt, and that would have been the best sumptuous meal they've had in a while. As though that was not sad enough, they told us of nursing mothers who were unable to come. They told us of the elderly who were unable to come, people who were too sick in their hearts to come. So we asked, where are they? Where are they? And they said, your bus can't get there. The roads are too narrow. So we hopped onto motorbikes. And one team went to see these old men who'd not eaten for days. They were starving. They were so starving that when we arrived, one of them literally fell down and fainted from hunger. What was especially touching is how these old men would point to each other. There were about 10 of them, and they would point to the ones who are most hungry. And if you give one of them a chapati, they'll tell you, no, please feed my friend because he's about to die. And as you can see from these pictures, they were really emaciated. They could not walk. They had sat under this tree waiting for fate. I myself took a journey into this lady's hut, and it was an interesting journey because the road kept getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And after a 20-minute bike ride, we finally got to this compound. We had been told she'd been sick and had not been seen or heard in a while. So when we got to her place, into her compound, our hearts were beating. We were worried. Was she alive? Would we find her alive? And we got into the village and we called out her name, and we kept calling and we kept calling. And she did not answer. We finally got to this hut, a small, tiny hut, and we kept calling, and I was the last on the line, and my heart was beating, wondering, was she alive? Would we find her alive? So my friends who got in before me, and they started touching her to see if she would move. And I was at the door trying to figure out how my frame would fit into this tiny space. And I was trying to twist myself in, and I could see her finally being lifted to a sitting position. And she sat up, and we looked round her hut, and she had nothing. 2 sufurias, 3 stones, 1 mabati box. That's all she had. And I sat on a stone. And then her first question was, who are you people? We told her we'd come from Nairobi and we'd come to help. And what she said next, I will never forget, because she said, I lay here and I told God, I'm either going to die, you're going to send me help. And he said, do you mean to tell me that God can send an angel from Nairobi to me? Am I that important to God? And it broke my heart, because I don't have to be important to it. You don't have to be important to it. But for her, it was a miracle that she was eating. She told us that the last meal she'd had was porridge that a neighbor had happened to pass by. If you looked at her sufuria had been dry, not cooked in days. She spoke as if her lungs were congested. And I couldn't say a word because I was so heartbroken at her condition. I thought of my grandmother who had passed on, and she lived with my mother and she had food, and she smiled every time she saw me, and she was happy. I looked at this lady and you couldn't tell whether she was old or young because she was too emaciated. And she sat there and we gave her this packet of milk, and she drank it.
Amadou.
And you could see the light come back in her eyes, and you could see her come back alive. And for the first time, I came face to face with what we have done as a people, that we've ignored each other, that we've let our love grow cold, that we've forgotten in our own problems, in our own Nairobi, Nakuru, Eldoret problems, we've forgotten that some people have it worse. And so she drank her milk, and she told us how she needs softer foods, and she needed our help to get her food from the shops. And she had no one to send, because what happens here is survival for the fittest. So her children had moved out. She had no way of telling them that she was sick. And even if they were to know that she was sick and dying, they didn't have the resources to go see her. And if they could go see her, they didn't have the food to give her. So she had laid there to die. That's why she'd laid there. And so we asked her, can we give you money? And I gave her a note, and she didn't know what it is. She'd never seen it. And she said, even if you give me money, it will not help me. I cannot get the 15 kilometers to Kokwototo where there is a shop. And so we sat there and she told us how her chest had gotten infected, how she'd lost her goats, how she'd lost everything because she had no ability to defend herself. And finally came time when we had to leave. And as we left this woman's house, I reminded God that He'd given us a promise in His word that if they let us into their houses, then we can give them our peace. So I told God, please give her the peace I have. Give her health. Lord, keep her, because there's nothing we could do. We could not carry her on the motorcycles we came with, because if we did, she'd die. We could not move her. The only thing we could do was pray that the aid we'd given and the prayer we'd made would have been enough to save a life. So we rode back in silence, and we met up with the rest of the team, and they were distributing shoes. And these kids were elated. Their feet were hard. They put on these shoes, and you could see their eyes brighten up. These were just shoes, not expensive shoes, just shoes. And as we distributed these shoes, a silence fell upon us, a deep knowing that we had to go back, that we owed it to our friends to go back. These people who we had promised to love and journey with, we'd promised them to go back. And go back we will. Go back we must. Not once, not twice, but as many times as is needed for them to be better. So we want to go back and we want to help them dig their shambas so the short rains can produce some kind of crop. We want to teach them how to dry meat again. We want to teach them how to dry their foods. We want to teach them how to dig small water ponds in their compounds so that they can keep some water. We want to take water tanks so that they can store some water. What we want to do is be like the Good Samaritan. To forget our religion, to forget our tribes, to forget our comfort, to forget that the government should have done something, and to remember that we are God's government. We are God's hand on this earth, and for as long as we have breath, we want to do something, however little. So to my friends in our village, our mothers and fathers and our brothers and sisters, we are coming again. And what we are asking you to do is to join us as we go back, whether you have expertise or you have money or you have just a heart to help, or you can help dig, you can donate a jembe or some unga. We are going back because this is not a hunger problem, it's a poverty problem. These people are desperately poor. And if we can help them out of the poverty, we will perhaps have changed just one more place for the benefit of our God. So our M-Pesa number is on the screen right now. We're asking you to donate so that this village can have some dignity, can be hunger-free, and can have water. So we're not doing this because of a drought. We're doing this because we love God's people, and we want to be the change we're always agitating to see. Thank you.